you're working too hard. I'm here to give you guys some tips and tricks on how to make sure that your classroom is not only effective, functional, but that you don't have to work so hard every day, because teaching is exhausting. But we love it, right? This is why we're still here. This is why I'm 14 years plus in. Every time I go back and forth, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? Guess what? I'm still doing this because deep down inside, I do feel like my passion is to teach the kids. So how do I make sure that I can maintain my sanity, my structure, but also give students independence, right? Because at the end of it all, we want them to be able to grow from our classroom, not feel stunted, not just grow academically, but also as humans, so that when they leave our classroom and get into the real world, they have skills that they need for life. So let's get into it, because you're probably working a little bit too hard, and these tips and tricks will give you some ways on how to alleviate what you're doing in the classroom and have your students do more. And the trick is, they want to do more. They like doing more. They like the control. They like the leadership. So why not just trust them and give them the responsibility? First tip to make sure your students are doing more and you're doing less, it's an oldie but a goodie: have student-led procedures. I'll be honest, I'm guilty of not necessarily taking advantage of this in the beginning. I wanted to do it all. I wanted to hand out the papers. I wanted to collect the papers. I wanted to make sure that I was a control freak through and through. And guess what? 14 years in, that is really hard to sustain. And it becomes to the point where if you're not in the room, if you're not always giving instruction, your students will never know what to do. Your classroom should be able to function without you there. As crazy as that sounds, there should be so much structure, routine, and responsibilities and ownership on your students that if you're not in the room, they still know what happens next, who's responsible for what. And that's the whole point of student-led procedures. You want to have a structure for almost everything. Who's going to hand out the papers? How will papers be collected? I have students put papers in one pile. They sit in groups of 4 or 5 in my classroom. Hey, put all the papers in the center. Everybody should have a number in the classroom. All my number 1s, my number 2s, my 3s, my 4s, and my 5s. Hey, guess what? Number 3, it's your day today. Put the papers in the back. That way it's fair. That way students aren't going back and forth and bickering over who has to go and return papers. You could also have them return their own papers, but having a numbered system, I find, works really well in the classroom. That numbered system can also take you into other things like sharing for class. Okay, everyone, I want you guys to respond to this Turn and Talk question, and afterward, all of my number 2s from every table are going to share out loud and corroborate your group's conversation. That way 2s are aware, but then the students know that it could always change moving forward. 1, this allows for structure. Every student feels responsible and a sense of ownership, because we know there's times where it's just the 2 to 3 students that are always participating in the room. And how exactly do we get other students to share? Number system. It ends up being fair. Students are called on equally, and then that way you get to hear each student's voice. Other responsibilities that you can have in class is if there are certain materials or resources that always have to go out. I know that there's a science teacher in my school where she assigns students, okay, you're the one that gives out the workbook, you're the one that hands out the materials, and this is rotated on a weekly basis. If weekly is too much for you, maybe assign these roles on a monthly basis. But students love this responsibility. This is probably where I've seen the most participation from my students, because they want to be involved and they want to help collecting things, handing things out. This is really going to alleviate what you have to do in the classroom, and then you could just sit back and watch everybody have everything that they need, and you didn't have to do any of it. Second thing, another reason why you're doing too much is because you're at every student's beck and call. And I've been there too. Miss, 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 miss. And it's just like, I need 5 minutes where everyone is just sitting down and not talking to me. But the reason why that's happening is because you are the sole authority or answer helper in your classroom. If students knew that they had the freedom to ask somebody else for help, this would alleviate a lot of the responsibility on your plate. So we all know this strategy, or if you don't know, now you know. Ask 3 before me. Ask 2 students, go to your notes before you end up asking me for help. 9 out of 10 times, there is someone within that student's vicinity that knows the answer to what that student is asking you. Allow for students to help each other. Don't create an environment where you have to be the sole person that is always answering everything. That is exhausting, and that's also not an environment that fosters true learning. Students should feel comfortable being able to help each other and ask each other for help. Another example is roles for group work. This is something that I have taken advantage of and I love it. I will try to pop up something in the screen here, just like a little screenshot of what my students see. But when it's time to do group work, assign roles. As mentioned, I usually have 4 to 5 students sitting at a table. So there's always about 2 group readers. If there's an assignment that they have to read together, 2 people should be reading. 1 person is the group leader. That's the person that's keeping track of time, organizing the folder or station materials, making sure that everyone is staying on task. I also have a group sharer. That group sharer is going to share one thing they learned or maybe summarize on behalf of the entire group. I allow my students to decide who those 4 to 5 people are, and they are aware that it changes daily. So maybe someone today is a reader and they don't like to read. It's okay, because tomorrow your role can change. You just have to suck it up for today because so-and-so ended up reading yesterday. This way there is shared responsibility. It feels fair within the classroom, and students also have a bit of autonomy in deciding what role they want to play that day. It's about reason. It's about allowing them to see that the classroom is about fairness, but also what is also fair is that sometimes you have to do things that you don't always want to do. But I'm telling you, having this structure so that students know exactly what their role is and their responsibility, 1, you gain so much more class time, because now when it's time to share out, you're not like, okay, who am I going to call on next? No, students already know. This is the group sharer. Boom, 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 boom. In that order, everybody is sharing out. So I've actually noticed that by assigning roles, I gain so much class time. Transitions take less because students know the role that they play. Third thing, you should have some type of visual cues in your classroom for student behavior and student expectations. This way you can always refer back to an anchor chart and save your energy. A student has a question about something, you can point to whatever anchor chart you have and say, I want you to reread that one more time. Have directions displayed. I always verbally say directions. I always keep them up on the board, but there's always that student that comes in maybe from the bathroom or sat there the whole time and is like, what are we doing? It's like, before you go and explain it, or before you are rude and you're like, I just said it, you say, the directions are on the board, please read the directions. That's it. Refer them back to being independent and not relying on you to baby them, but putting the ownership back on them. If they still don't understand, you can say, after you read the directions, if you still have questions, ask one of your classmates. Teach them to not always rely on you. Conserve your energy for the things that matter, for you to be vigilant in the classroom, to see maybe certain concerns. Sometimes I'm so frazzled with having to answer questions, or students have all of these various issues that A student could be crying in the corner, or somebody just looks off, right? They look a little sad, and it took you maybe too long to actually identify that there was a need in your room. You want to make sure that you don't have to be running around like a chicken with no head, because there's so many different needs, so many different roles that you have to play in the classroom, when you could alleviate some of that stress and give those responsibilities to your students. Lastly, a way to make sure that you're doing less and your students are doing more is to include your students in your lesson planning process. Now, when I first heard this piece of advice, this was my reaction. Yeah, okay. But hear me out. With some things, it actually helps. Include your student in maybe creating questions for a test. That way, maybe you're able to get 10 really strong questions as opposed to having to come up with 30 on your own. Maybe you need a station idea and you're up to only 4 stations, but you need another topic. We were learning about ancient Mesopotamia, and one of my students said, you know what would be a really fun station? To learn about the roles of men and women within their marriage. A 6th grader said that. I was like, that would actually be a great station. What are some things that you would want to know? Why don't you create a list of questions for me? And then that way I had guided questions, or at least an idea of what students were interested in for that station that I could create in the future. This is having your students be a part of the learning process. They are invested in what they're learning now, but also you just didn't have to think of an idea. They willingly gave it and then also created something as a guide for you to then go and make it, a solid, great lesson. So include your students in ways that you think are feasible for their grade level and ways that you think would actually be helpful. You'd be super surprised how much students are willing to contribute and how great their ideas are if you just give them a chance to invest in the classroom. These are ways to make sure that you can work smarter and not harder, have your students take ownership of the classroom, give them more responsibility. It shouldn't just be that you're in here to teach. It should be, hey, this is our classroom. And then you're secretly in the back like, gotcha, because now you've been able to conserve your energy, focus your time and attention on the things that matter in the classroom, identifying key concerns amongst your students, and of course, being the best that you can be for them mentally and emotionally, because we know that teaching is an exhausting job, but we're here for the long haul. And so I hope that these tips and tricks helped you. Please make sure that you subscribe to my channel, that you like this video, and I will see you all in the next one.